Good evening, everybody. Today, we're going to have a quick discussion on what are some of the common legal mistakes that people make, maybe in communication or even while writing. So, before I start with the session, I want to have a quick understanding about what are the biggest challenges you guys face while learning legal English. Very good evening, Anil. Maybe you can drop it in the chat box, whatever challenges you face while understanding legal English. You can also raise your hands and I can unmute you and you can express your opinion, or maybe you can just put it in the chat box. Whatever common problems, issues, challenges that you face while speaking or writing legal English. So before we delve into what are the common mistakes, let's understand where all of us are. That's okay, Anil, you can put it in the chat box, whatever your challenge is. Okay, also one quick understanding before beginning, how comfortable all of you are with English. Shall I speak entirely in English or shall I speak in English, like Hindi and English both? English, all right, okay. Okay, right, Shankar, there's no specific cost with respect to legal language in law schools, but we have one at LawSikho. Okay. So I'm going to mostly speak in English. Sometimes I'm going to shift to Hindi. However, if there is anything that you don't understand that I'm saying, please feel free to interrupt me. You can just raise your hand or maybe drop in a chat box. I will take up your queries. Okay. Anybody, what are your challenges when you're trying to communicate in English, when you're trying to understand the legal language better? What are the challenges that you face? Okay. So I'll tell you about myself. So what was my biggest challenge when I started my journey? So I come from a Marwari family where all of us either speak in Hindi or Marwari. English is not a language that we speak at home. At school also, I mean, I studied in a convent school. We were English, like basically all of us spoke in English at that time, but that was very, very basic, I would say. Even when we were participating in competitions, I could speak in English, but that was only when I had a script in hand. Okay, so even when I'm participating in a competition, we had scripts prepared beforehand. So I was pretty comfortable speaking that way. However, if somebody would just ask me to, speak impromptu, that would just make me very, very uncomfortable. And I had no idea how to go about that. When I started my journey as a lawyer, or when I just entered the law school, again, I was very apprehended, because if you tell me that, okay, this is what you have to present before the audience, I was comfortable doing that. But if you just ask me to speak impromptu, I would be very, very nervous. And that is where, when I understand that, this is causing an hindrance. I could not participate in moot court competitions. I could not participate in MUNs. This was restricting myself from participating in competitions. And also when I was going at internships, so the people that I knew at my college, okay, I could freely speak to them. But if I was going at newer places, internship, I found it very difficult to communicate with people. That is where, when I realized that I need to master this language. So that was how I got more familiar to the language. But during the process, I made a lot of mistakes. And by paying a lot of attention to those mistakes, working again and again on them, that is only when I could, break through the barrier. So before we move ahead, what are some of the common mistakes that you are aware about that you have been making? That's correct, Anil. Any kind of maxims is a challenge. That's a good one, Yuvraj. Even I struggled a lot with maxims. So we will be discussing that very shortly, like what is the way to go around with them. Any common mistakes that you are aware about, that you know or you have previously made in learning language? Any common mistakes that you can think about? Lack of practice. Okay. So I'm going to quickly do my screen share. Okay. Let me know if my screen is visible to all of you. Is my screen visible? Oh, so Dhanesh says that fewer chances of practice. So this happened with me also when I started my journey. What you can do is that one of the best ways to go forward is every time you're having an internal conversation, every time you're speaking to yourself, which we do all the time, try and speak in English. That's the first basic and a small change that you can make so that you're able to practice more and more. So in today's session, what we are going to look at is common legal English mistakes that people make and what are the ways that we can fix them. So number one, here's just a quick example. If anybody can spot an error in this sentence, anybody, except for the full stop. I mean, I know there's no full stop in the sentence, but besides that, if there is any error that you can spot, you can probably put it in the chat box. Anybody? Yes, keep typing it, keep typing it. There's one more, there's one more. Okay, anything else that you can spot? Okay, okay. So anything with respect to grammar? Anything that you can find an error with respect to grammar? Zaki is correct that for is 2 times, but then which one should be replaced? And if it needs to be replaced, then with what? Asking and demanding, you can change. I mean, both works. I mean, there is nothing wrong in writing asking as well. So you can change it interchangeably. Okay. So if we look at it, the grammatical mistake here is that it is not 5,000 INR for damages. It is 5,000 INR in damages. Okay, compensation and damages again can be used interchangeably. That is fine. So it's not for damages. We are not asking money for damages. We are asking this amount. We are asking 5,000 as a compensation in damages. Understanding? So this is one of the common mistakes that, so when I am editing my files, editing a blog post for iPleaders, this is one of the common mistakes that I look at. So it's always in damages and not for damages. Now, one of the most important thing is that when people start learning legal English, what they do is they just learn legal vocabulary. However, that is not what is all required. You need to also understand the structure in which you are using the words. Okay, so again, while editing files, I have noticed this, that students, because they want to, when they're writing a particular sentence and they would want to use a very fancy word for a particular word that they're writing, they start using words that do not fit in the context. So there might be a synonym. So if you open thesaurus and you see, it might be an available synonym for that particular word, but it might not work well as the synonym for that place. Okay, like for instance, because of the accident, I incurred mental distress. What do you think is incorrect in this sentence? I'm going to put it in the chat box. Because of the accident, I incurred. That's correct. Incurred, the usage of word incurred is not correct here. What it should be? I suffered mental agony, maybe. I suffered mental distress, maybe. So incur is mostly used for expenses. So this is what happens, that, a lot of times while writing or speaking, you might think that, these words are synonyms to each other and can be used interchangeably. However, you need to understand the structuring of the sentence. You need to understand in which context a particular word is used, right? So do not just learn legal vocabulary, see the structure and the context. Okay. Sustained. Now, someone suggested the word sustained. Now, sustained is a better word when it is used for injuries, maybe. I sustained injuries. But when I am expressing mental agony, a perfect word would be suffered. Of course, I am so sorry if this wasn't there. I have done that. Okay, so I think now you can read whatever I'm typing. The another important thing is that don't just learn fixed phrases. Now, what happens sometimes, students just mug up the legal phrases, but they don't know how to use them. And why is this barrier? Because they haven't really understood the context in which they are to be used, right? Like a very good example is sine qua non. Can you quickly make sentences on this? I'm putting it here. Okay, and quickly, if you guys can make sentences. One is already there on the display, but if you can make sentences out of this. What is the meaning of sine qua non? Anybody? Oh, that's a very good one, Shilpa. Correct. It's the indispensable part. So when I also say don't just learn fixed phrases, that is fixed legal maxims, is because specifically when you're communicating with your clients, okay, you will not be using these maxims as it is. Understanding of legal maxims are important because your fellow lawyers might be using it. You might be coming across such words in judgments. However, a greater emphasis in modern legal English is to avoid using legalese as much as possible. So when you're writing, maybe, or when you're speaking even to your clients, you will not be using these words, right? You will instead be using synonyms like indispensable. Okay. However, it is important that when you're learning and understanding these words, you are doing it in the whole context, right? You're not just doing don't just mug these words up. Otherwise, you won't be able to use them and it will not help, right? So I have seen that, there are a lot of students who just ask for a list of legal maxims. Give me the list of legal maxims, and they'll just ratify that. That will not help. What instead you need to do is that in your day-to-day practice, like when maybe, let's say, you're writing a case analysis, maybe let's say you're writing a commentary on a particular case, you're decoding a policy document, maybe in all those places you will try and use these words and also emphasize on using a simpler version of that particular maxim that you're using. Okay, so that'll be way more helpful. Now, don't just read court judgments. Why do you think this one is a barrier in learning legal English? Anybody? I think one of the attendees has a question. I'll just take that up. In the meanwhile, I want you to answer this. Why do you think just reading court judgments will not help you in learning better English? Sakshi has a question. Sakshi, you're allowed to speak. Please tell me. Sakshi, you can unmute yourself and tell me your question, or alternatively, you can also put it in the chat box. Rishabh says that because we can see how the words of legal maxim can be put in the sentence, it can also help in learning more legal terms, but not just English solely. Maybe because it is written in simple English, basically the format, how the pattern is being followed up. Some of the judgments are filed with jargon and it is difficult to comprehend in one. That's absolutely correct, Ajay. So now when you're trying to learn a language, there could be different stages, okay? One stage could be that you're just beginning, okay, like a beginner's level, wherein you're even struggling with understanding the basic terms and terminology, right? Even basic terms that are used in legal English, like for example, abandon. Okay, so if you are at a beginner stage and if someone asks you to read court judgments, you will find it extremely difficult to understand the whole thing, and it'll be very, very difficult to follow through the entire practice. Since you're not able to understand it, you will just give it up in between. However, let's say you are not at a beginner level, you're at a slightly more advanced level. In that scenario, what would happen is that if you're only reading court judgments to improve your English, there are high chances that you will not be able to understand how to use those words in alternative usages and contexts, because what you're reading is very, very limited to the kind of vocabulary that particular judge will have. Okay, and sometimes even the sentence structures are not very clear, they are unnecessarily very, very long. So you'll just adopt the style that, writing in such ways is a better method of doing it. So therefore, in my opinion, reading court judgments, of course, it is one important step, but you cannot solely rely on that. Correct. That's absolutely correct, Akshay. You can also read novels and you can also read newspapers, because then you will be able to. Now, let's say, also, for instance, if somebody is practicing in corporate field, for them it becomes very important that they are reading judgments. They're not just reading judgments that are passed by NCLT or High Courts or Supreme Court. They're also reading Economic Times, maybe Indian Express, so that they understand how business words are used pertaining to a transaction. All right. So don't rely on just reading court judgments. Now, this also brings us to the next this thing, that don't just read. Okay. So what Akshay mentioned, that you can read other stuff as well. But however, understand that only reading will not help. So if someone's wondering that, if I just keep on reading and that will help me better my communication skills, legal communication skills, no, that's not going to happen. For making your communication skills better, you need to also practice other things. That is speaking, listening, and writing. So all these three things are important along with reading. So you need to listen also very, very carefully. Okay, so sometimes what happens that when you're listening to somebody, you are already listening with a lot of preconceived notions, and hence you're not able to get the clear message out of the communication that's being made. So, and when that doesn't happen, you're not able to respond properly. However, in that case, the entire chain breaks. So therefore, it is important that you're not just focusing only on reading, but also on listening, speaking, and writing. Now, speaking, of course, it's understood how that will be helpful. Now, how writing helps. Writing is a very important exercise that helps you clarify your thoughts. So let's say if somebody asks you, what is the process of mergers and acquisitions in India? You might know this process, okay? However, when you write down the entire thing, you'll have a lot of clarity of thought. And when you have a lot of clarity of thought, you're able to speak and communicate better. So therefore, focus on all the four things: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Sakshi is asking a question that how to write precisely using legal vocab. You've always faced this problem. So Sakshi, your writing will get better when you're practicing. Okay. So you start with the topic that you have a fair understanding about. One of the best ways to do, or how I started, was doing case analysis. Now, why case analysis is a slightly more simpler version of writing? Because what happens is you already have the main substance ready. That is, you only need to identify what are the main issues, main facts of the case, and then what was being held by the court. If you're able to identify these three main things, you'll be able to write a case analysis, right? And also your vocabulary in that particular case will be very, very limited to what is being used in the judgment. And then you keep practicing and keep building upon it. Keep trying different variation of writing styles. Like for instance, one of course is case analysis. Then another is writing how-to articles. Those are process-based. Then you can move on to a more complex piece, writing a blog post, writing an op-ed. Then moving a slightly more complex, doing white papers, research papers, and handbooks. That's how you like it'll be like a whole journey. So you can start with the more basic one and then move to the more nuanced pieces. We also have a course on legal writing wherein we teach different aspects of writing to our students. That course is also there. So, but I think this does help, okay, that just don't rely on reading and again on watching dramas. So a lot of people have this preconception in mind that, if they watch a lot of sitcoms, their English will improve. How many of you think it works like that? No, absolutely. Yes, it doesn't work like that. So, absolutely correct. There are a lot of people who rely on it as a source for improving their English. They just think that, if I watch something in English, my English will get better. But it doesn't happen, because when you're watching something, your brain is also not that active. Besides that, the important aspect is to pay more attention towards sentence structuring and grammar, right? So therefore, there are a lot of people who wonder that, I watch everything in English, but still I can't communicate that effectively in this particular language. Why is that? I'm constantly listening in English, but it doesn't reflect. That happens because you are listening, but you're not very clear as to how to structure sentences, right? Where to use which word. Those aspects becomes clearer and clearer when you are indulging in writing and speaking. Okay. So this one is slightly more particular. So till now, like the 5 mistakes that we discussed were very, very broad. Now we're moving slightly in particulars. That is, don't use ambiguous pronouns. Now, this is very common, and I say it all the time when students are writing. Just read this example. Laura has a letter for Dinah, but couldn't deliver it because she was blocking her way. What do you think is confusing in this sentence? So the sentence here, Laura has a letter for Dinah, but couldn't deliver it because she was blocking her way. Correct. Correct. She is who? We don't know, right? It's very confusing. Correct. Who couldn't deliver is not clear. Who was blocking whose way is not clearer, right? We don't really. So this sentence is very ambiguous in its nature because of the kind of pronouns that are being used, right? We understand that there are probably 2 females here in the subject of the sentence. But however, when we look at the pronouns, we really don't know which one is used for whom, or is there a third person in the context here? Correct? Yes. So a correct way of writing this would be that Laura has a letter for Dinah, but couldn't deliver it because Petra was blocking Laura's way, if it's a third person, or let's say if Dinah was blocking her way, maybe whoever, but that needs to be more clearer. Like you can't use ambiguous pronouns. So always, so when you're writing, you need to be very sure about the kind of pronouns that you're using in a sentence. Another important thing is that don't use unnecessary words. How many of you have noticed law students or lawyers using these words a lot? However, nonetheless, therefore. Do you think that lawyers or law students use these words a lot? Okay. Anil has seen that. Anybody else? Right, right. So as a law student, I always wonder that what's the point of using however, nonetheless, therefore, every time in a sentence? So you need to, these words, these are connectors, okay? And these connectors are important only in the context. Okay, now, however is when you're expressing a particular situation, but then you need to talk about a contrast. So then you say, however. But be very mindful while using these words. And if you think that, your sentence can be done away without using these words, just so after writing, let's say you've written a sentence and maybe after writing, you think that, I can actually do away with this word in the sentence, then take it off. We don't need to overcomplicate things, okay? See, the entire purpose of communication be it in a written form or when you're speaking, is that your message, whatever is the message that you're delivering, should be effectively communicated to the person that you're speaking to. In order to happen that, it is important that you're not overcomplicating sentences, right? So always check for these words. Don't overcomplicate it. Do not put them unnecessarily. So just check after you've written a sentence, see whether you actually need it or whether you can do away with it. By the way, actually is also a word that a lot of people use repeatedly, even when it's not needed. So just check, be clear about that. Now, don't use incorrect homophones. What are homophones? Anybody? Yes, Shilpa, that's correct. Words that have same sound are known as homophones. Now, what are some of the common homophones you know besides what I've stated here? Allude and illude are definitely one. Ensure, formally. So here I've given few examples for your reference. But what are the common homophones that you come across in your day-to-day life? Correct. That's correct. Inquiry and inquiry. Yes. Accept and accept. Oh, yes, the most common one. Anything else that you can think of? There and there. Yes, this was the one that I was waiting for. That's correct. Anything else? So how do you, so check. Okay. Okay. Then and then. Right. So it's important. So now this is a major struggle for people who are just starting learning English. Okay. That is where they struggle with this a lot, because when they hear a word, they just write it like that. Okay. Without paying actual attention to what is the real spelling for that particular word. So in case if you're confused, just Google and check once what is the correct spelling. Okay. Do not use incorrect homophones because it entirely changes the sentence. All right. So be very careful about this one. Now, coming to legalese. How many of you love using legalese while writing? This one is particularly with respect to writing. I wonder how many people use it while speaking, but specifically when writing. Okay, Shilpa loves using legalese while writing. All right. Anybody else who is a fan of using legalese? Very impressive, so I use this. Okay, all right. Okay, so what I see from my audience is that most of you enjoy using legalese. But here's the thing, that when we are, so you need to understand who are you writing for. If you're writing an article for your client, in that scenario, avoid using legalese because your reader will not understand what you're saying. And every time, I understand that, you know, how it makes a document look very impressive, but have a distinction between a professional reading document to making it slightly overcomplicated. Okay, so you can use professional words, but don't try and use legalese, because a layman will not understand the meaning and then they will have to constantly Google what you're saying. Like, for instance, if I'm communicating with a fellow lawyer, I'll be comfortable using the word, using the phrase sine qua non, right? However, if I'm communicating with a client, or if I'm communicating with a person who's come up with a query, then I will not be using this word. Why? Because they will have no understanding what I'm saying. They will again have to Google and see that, okay, you know, what is the meaning of this word? So be careful about whom are you communicating with, and in that context, decide how much legalese will you use in your document. If it's if it is strictly a court document, then of course it's fine. I mean, of course you can use legalese, but if you're writing on the internet, if you're writing on LinkedIn, if you're writing an article, then try and balance it out. Okay, if you're using something, maybe you can provide the meaning in the brackets, or you can just explain the term through very clearly, so that everybody who reads your document is able to understand what you're speaking about. All right. Okay, this one is something very annoying that I find. When people are writing articles, they just randomly capitalize words. How many of you do this? without even realizing that whether a particular word needs to be government or needs to be capital or not. Like, for example, government. Okay. Okay. So we need to understand that only proper nouns are written in capital. Rest everything is small. Okay. Specifically, yes, Yuvraj, please tell me your question. If you want, I can unmute yourself, or maybe you can just type it in the chat box. Yes, of course. You're allowed to speak now. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Of course. Yes.
So first of all, good evening, ma'am. I just want to know that we have to do lots of research paper and essay writing. So what we can do to improve our writing in terms of legal documents or like legal English, so we would have a better writing in that sense. Like in research paper we have to conduct lots of research and we have to write lots of legalese, for example. So tips you can give us, like, just to have a better at legal writing?
All right, definitely. So, though our topic is with respect to common mistakes, since you've asked this question, I will deal with this question here briefly. But there are a lot of other videos that you can watch on this particular topic. We also have a particular course on legal writing that takes you into detail about various forms of writing, how to article, then essay writing, research papers, white papers, and all of that. But to answer your question briefly here, uh, first and foremost, you need to identify your audience. Who are you writing this article? Okay, who is this research paper for? Who is this white paper for? Once you have understood your audience, it will give you a sense about what kind of words you can use. Okay, so as a writer, you always have a leverage upon the kind of words that you use. Okay, you can use complicated words, you can use simple words, you can play around with whichever format you want. But for that, to be able to use the correct word for your audience, you need to understand who is your audience and what is their level of understanding. Right? Once you have known that, the another first most important thing is to have a structure of your article before you begin writing or even begin searching. Now, what is the structure of an article? A structure is basically that gives you like a broad pointers that you will be addressing in your article. Those are common questions. Like, let's say, for example, if you're talking about patentability of recipes, whether a recipe is patentable or not, let's say that's your topic. So you first want to think about what, if you're writing for a client, then maybe you would want to think about what are the pain points of your client. Your client would be wondering, oh, I made this dalgona coffee recently. Do you think I can get this patented? Do you think it's absolutely unique to me? Right? So you first identify what are the questions that people must be having around those topics, create a structure, and then begin writing. That way, your research will also be in a particular order. There would be a flow in what you're doing. And also, you'll be able to address the pain points of your clients or your audience that to for whom you're writing the piece. Okay. Yes, no worries, Anil, you can. All right. So here's what is important, that do not randomly capitalize. Don't make nouns that are plural in compound adjectives. Do you think this one is correct? I'm going for a 10 minutes run. Yes, Anubhav, that's absolutely correct with respect to capitalization. It's only proper nouns that you capitalize. Thanks, Anil. Okay, so this one, 10 minutes run. I'm going for a 10 minutes run. It's correct or incorrect? Let's have a 10 minutes break. Incorrect. Okay, Nisha, why is it incorrect? I've put out the rule very clearly, though, that when you are writing a compound adjective, so yes, so here 10 minutes, it would be 10-minute run. Okay, so when you're using compound adjectives, you don't have to make the noun plural. Okay, it's always singular. Like, for instance, question mark not needed. I mean, a question mark is just to ask you guys what is your opinion on it. But the point is that when we are using compound adjectives, that is 10 minutes. Okay, here, how long was my run? 10 minutes. So 10 minutes is the compound adjective here, and run is the noun. So when we are using compound adjectives, you don't make this plural. Okay, it's always singular. Like, for example, I have a 3-year-old daughter. It is not I have 3 years old daughter. It will not be years, it will be year. All right. I'm just resharing my screen. I don't know why it went. So is this rule clear to everybody? All right. Let's move ahead. Okay, so this one, revert back or reply back. Which one is correct? Or both of them are incorrect? That's correct, Anubhav. Revert is correct. So this is again very commonly that I've come across people using incorrectly. So Sakshi, revert back is incorrect. Okay. Yes. Yes. Why? Because revert in itself means that I'm going to respond to somebody that is already replying back. Understanding? So when you're either replying or you're reverting, this is already an action that is in response to something that has happened. So there is no use of putting back. All right. So it's I will revert to you quickly. I will reply to you quickly. That's the correct usage. All right. So this is again a common mistake. Anyways and anyway. Do you think anyways is a word? What do you think? Okay, anyways is not a word. Okay, it's anyway. All right. So here again, there is a lot of misconception that people have. Anyways is also a word. So if you open dictionary, you will always find this word after anyway. Anyways is also a word. However, it is mostly used in colloquial English, that is in colloquial speech. While speaking, somebody can say anyways. Both the words have similar meaning. Okay, they both are used interchangeably. However, when you're writing, you focus more on using anyway. And anyways is only used while speaking. That's the only difference. However, both of them are correct words. Okay. Per se and per se, which one is correct? Okay, Nisha says per se is correct. Anybody else? Don't know per se. I don't know. Okay. So both these spellings are incorrect. The correct spelling is per se, what Anubhav mentioned. It is per se. This is the correct spelling. Okay, so this is again one of the most common errors that I have seen people making. So be very careful about, because we say, so again, homophones, remember? So because we say it's per se, people use it not SE and SAY, which is incorrect. Okay, client versus customer. Who knows the difference between the two? Lawyers have clients or customers? Quick question. Clients. Bank have clients or customers? Customers. Okay. Banks do not have clients in any scenario. So these two words are also, people use it interchangeably without paying due attention as to when to use a client and when to use a customer. Again, a very quick question. Do banks have clients ever, or do they only have customers? Quick question. Banks do have both. Right. That's correct. So when do they become clients? So when somebody who's constantly purchasing your goods or services and you have like a long-term business relationship with them, they become your client. Okay, which and that. This is again very common, a common error that people make. They're not very clear about when to use which and when to use that. So both of them are relative pronouns. Okay, so what are relative pronouns? Relative pronouns are basically, they give reference to the main word that is used in the sentence, the noun maybe. So which is used in the non-restrictive sense, and that is used in a restrictive sense. So you can quickly look at the examples here. The car that the police were chasing reached the intersection first. Now here we are restricting. When the word that has been used, we are talking about the specific car, correct? We're not talking about any car here, right? It is restricting. The word that is restricting the meaning of the entire sentence, of the meaning of the word car. So therefore we use that as a restrictive pronoun. Okay, and which is used in a non-restrictive sense. So if you see the second example, the blue car which entered the intersection after the accident was not speeding. Okay, so if ever you get confused between whether I should put which or that here, consider that whether it is restricting the meaning or it is non-restrictive in sense. If it is non-restrictive, it could be any blue car. Okay, so those of you who are still thinking that, the car is specific, it's that blue car, but which blue car, we don't know. It could be any blue car. But here in the first sentence, it's restrictive. I'm only talking about the car that the police were chasing. Okay, so when you want to restrict the meaning of the noun that you're using, you use that as a relative pronouns. However, if you want to keep it non-restrictive, then you use which. All right. Whether and if. How many of you get confused while using whether and if? Quick one, whether and if. Okay, Shilpa gets confused with this. All right, anybody else? What do you think is the difference between the two? All right, so I'll explain this one for you guys. So this one is again one of the very common mistakes that people make. Now, what happens is that whether is used when you have two or more options, when you have an alternative. Okay, whether, so like for example, and when you don't have any alternatives, in that scenario if is used. Like for example, if you see the first one, I don't know whether they will get a bail. Okay, so there is a possibility, whether or not they might get a bail, they might not get a bail. I don't know whether she will get justice or not. There is a possibility, there are two alternatives. Okay, however, if I have to say, I will be very happy if she gets justice. Okay, in this case, there is no option of alternative. Now, if is possible only if the first condition that happens, then only the second part is possible. Okay. Yes, if you had listened to me, that's correct, Anubhav. Again, whether it would be right to do A over B, right? So when you have alternatives, you use whether, and when there is no alternative, that is the case when you use an if. So if this happens, then this is there. Okay. Any confusions? I hope Nisha, Samyukta, Shilpa, you will not get confused now with the usage of whether and if. I hope it's clear now. Okay, great. Great. So we move forward. Who and whom. This is again something which people get confused a lot with. What do you think? When do we use who and when do we use whom? Any ideas, anybody? When to use who and when to use whom? So who is used in a subjective sense. That is when you're talking about he, she, they, that is where when you use who. Whom is used in the objective sense. That is when you when you're referring to him, her, and them, that is where you use whom. Also, whom is used mostly for objectives, object, and who is used for a subject, that is he or she. All right. Now, example is who is she, right? You don't say whom is she. That is incorrect. So whenever you will see that you're using in a sentence, whenever you're using she, he, they, that is the time you will use who. And whenever you're using him, her, all of that, then you use whom, right? What do you think about the second example? I wonder whom he bribed to get the contract. Yes, that's correct, Anubhav. So when we are addressing the subject, then it is who, otherwise it is who. What about this sentence, guys? I wonder whom he bribed to get the contract. What do you think about this one? Is this correct or it's incorrect? Okay. Swastik says who. Anybody else, whether this is correct or incorrect? That's correct. Nisha is correct. Whom should be used here? Any reasons why? No, whom is correct here. Okay, as we all know that English has a lot of exceptions. I told you about the he and she rule, but here we see this is an exception here. Why? If anybody can tell me, Nisha, you answered this correctly. Can you tell me why is this correct? Yes, here in the sentence, whom is correct? Correct. Correct. That's the correct reason, Anubhav, because we are addressing to the object here. So you have to pay attention to the object and the subject rule. He and she is also something that you can follow, but bigger than that is your subject and the object thing. Okay. Now this one is, so we were discussing few grammar rules. So we discussed some major mistakes. Then we spoke about some minor mistakes that we commit on everyday basis. Now the last two ones are something again in a bigger sense. So what happens is that when we give our power to others, when we say that, I will be judged if I speak in a certain way, I will be judged if I write in a certain way, that is where we lose our confidence and we start making more mistakes. So never give your power to others. Believe in yourself. Learning a language, learning anything new is great in itself. Not everybody has English as their mother tongue. It is a language that we're trying to learn. Okay. So don't fear. Don't think that, this person knows better than you. So how will you be able to make a difference, or how will you be able to do quality work? You need to measure your own progress, what you knew before and how you are growing in that particular path. So this is again one of the most common thing that people feel that, they're not able to learn the language better, they're not able to communicate effectively. And it's not because they don't know, it's not because they don't know how to speak in English, or they don't understand basic grammar, or they do not have good vocabulary. It's neither of them. It's only because they are giving their power to somebody else. They think that, others knows better, they will be judged. So do not do that. Another thing, specifically when you're making a public speech, do not worry about mistakes. Okay, mistakes will happen. All you have to do is you have to learn from those mistakes, take them as a stepping stone, and keep moving forward. I have come across there are a lot of students who do not participate in moot court activities, debate competitions, MUNs, just because they think that, they will be making mistakes and they will not be good enough. But do not focus on that aspect. Focus rather on what you're doing. Okay. Of course, if you'll make mistakes in your client document, that'll be heavy. You cannot do that. But that shouldn't be that shouldn't be a roadblock for you for doing things that you want to do. Right? So I think that is it from my end. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Also, those of you, because since a lot of you asked me about writing today, I would want you to know that on the 10th of this month, 10th of January, we will be having a session by Ramanuj Mukherjee. He will be he will be taking a 3-hour long workshop on how to write and publish your articles. If you're interested, you can attend that workshop. Any questions, anybody so far? If anybody has any questions, you can drop it in the chat box maybe, or you can just ask me, I will unmute you. In the meanwhile, I'm just sharing the link for the workshop. Whoever is interested can sign up for the workshop. It's a free workshop. You can register for it. Vasundhara is asking how to improve grammar. So see, for improving grammar, one thing that you need to understand is that you should be able to know the grammar rules. Then only you will be able to do that. If your grammar rules are not clear, that's going to be a huge hindrance. We also have a course at LawSikho on legal English, wherein we teach you English via different documents, like through RTI, through petition drafting and all of that. So that's one way. Like, so maybe while writing, you'll get more aware about grammar. Kiran, you can read any book. I mean, so currently I'm reading this one. So you can read any book that will really help you in improving your grammar. Particularly in case of legal sense, you may want to read Jeffrey Archer. That's one good author. Also, as Anubhav suggested, you should focus on reading newspapers. Reading newspapers will really help in understanding the business matters and also improving your vocabulary. So I think that is it from my end. If anybody of you have any questions, you can please let me know, or else we can just end the session here. Also, you can let me know the feedback for today's session in the chat. Thank you so much, Atul, for attending. Thank you, everybody. So, Sanyukta, that's the thing, right? I mean, just don't read. So only reading will not help you. You will also have to constantly make an effort of using those words in your day-to-day language, maybe while speaking to a friend. Use those words, whatever you're learning in newspaper or in reading books, try and use them in your daily conversations, maybe with your friends, with your mentor, at work, at your internship, right? And also try and involve yourself in activities where you will be required to speak a lot. That's the only way of, so there are good writers, people who can write really well, use heavy words while writing, but they might not be able to use those words in their everyday language. Why? Because they are not using those words while speaking also. So try and translate into that. Sanyukta, that's going to happen more with practice. So sign up for more events that require you to speak. The more you will speak, the better you will get at it. It's a learning process, will happen gradually. But do not, like, just because you're mixing up it with Hindi, do not stop your practice of speaking, okay? Or, you know, let's say if you're participating in debates, and let's say once or twice you realize that, okay, you know, you're not able to use those good words, or maybe you are mixing up with Hindi, that's okay. The next time you make a better effort, or maybe you can try. So this is what I try. You learn one new word and ensure that you're using that in the speech, maybe with a friend or at work. But whatever one new word that you want to use, you're using that. Like today, Anubhav used a very interesting word, botch. So try and use it in a conversation today. Okay. So I think that is it from me. I will just end the session here. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I hope you all had a good time.